Caleb Jennings had never considered himself a hero. He was just a man trying to make ends meet, juggling 2 jobs while raising his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, on his own. Life had been relentless since his wife, Sarah, passed away 2 years ago. Bills piled up, his old truck barely ran, and most days, he wondered how much longer he could keep up the fight. But Caleb wasn't the type to give up. Not when Lily needed him. Not when she still looked up at him with those big brown eyes, trusting him to make everything okay. That's why, on a cold and rainy morning, when he saw a desperate post on a local community board about a farmer needing urgent help after a flood, he didn't hesitate. The message was simple: need strong hands to help fix up my farmhouse after the storm. Pay what I can. Meals included. It wasn't much, but for Caleb, it was something. He called the number, and a woman named Margaret answered. Her voice was weary but kind, and she sounded relieved when he said he'd be there in an hour. The farm that time forgot. When Caleb and Lily arrived at the farm, his jaw nearly dropped. The land stretched far beyond what he could see, rolling hills drenched in morning mist. A massive barn stood in the distance, its red paint peeling, and beyond it, endless fields. But the farmhouse, it was a disaster. Water pooled in the yard, the wooden steps sagged from the flood, and inside, furniture lay overturned, soaked in muddy water. Margaret, the farmer, was nothing like Caleb had expected. She wasn't old or frail. She was in her late 30s, tall, with sun-weathered skin and sharp blue eyes that held exhaustion in something else, grit. She wore faded jeans and a work jacket 2 sizes too big, and despite the disaster around her, she smiled. You must be Caleb, she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. And you must be Lily. Lily, peeking out from behind Caleb's leg, nodded shyly. Thanks for coming, Margaret said, leading them inside. It's been a nightmare. The storm took out my drainage, and the flood came right through. Caleb surveyed the damage. It was worse than he thought. The foundation seemed intact, but the walls were damp, and the wooden floors were buckling in places. This wasn't a quick fix. I'll do what I can, he said. And he meant it. More than just a job. Caleb got to work immediately, starting with the worst of the water damage. Margaret worked alongside him, just as determined, dragging out ruined furniture and salvaging whatever she could. Lily followed them around, chattering away, offering to help in her own small ways, handing them tools, sweeping up debris with a tiny broom Margaret had found for her. Hours passed, and for the first time in a long while, Caleb felt something different: purpose. At noon, Margaret called them inside for lunch. The meal was simple: fresh bread, homemade soup, and hot cocoa for Lily. But it was the best meal Caleb had eaten in weeks. Margaret watched him as he ate, as if trying to figure him out. Finally, she spoke. Not many folks would come out here to help a stranger, she said. Caleb shrugged. Not many folks would offer food to someone they just met. Margaret chuckled. Fair enough. The rain eased as the day went on, and by sunset, the house looked less like a disaster zone and more like a home again. There was still work to do, but for the first time since the flood, Margaret seemed to breathe easier. Stay the night, she offered. There's a guest room. Safer than driving back in the dark. Caleb hesitated. He had never been one to accept charity. But then he looked at Lily, already dozing off on a couch beside the fire Margaret had built. All right, he said. A truth revealed. The next morning, Caleb woke early, determined to do more before they left. He stepped outside and saw Margaret standing near the barn, watching the sunrise over the hills. I need to thank you, she said as he approached. You don't have to, Caleb said. Just glad I could help. She turned to him then, her expression unreadable. You know, most people don't realize how big this farm is. They see the rundown house and the old barn and assume I'm barely scraping by. Caleb frowned, unsure where she was going with this. Margaret sighed, running a hand through her hair. My family has owned this land for generations. Over 3,000 acres. Caleb's breath hitched. 3,000. She nodded. I don't like talking about it. People treat you differently when they know you have money. Caleb felt his stomach drop. He had spent the whole day thinking she was barely making it, just like him. Margaret saw his expression and shook her head. I don't live rich, Caleb. This farm is everything to me, and I work it myself. Money doesn't fix everything. She hesitated. Like loneliness. Like trust. She looked at him then, really looked at him. You came out here not knowing anything about me, just because you saw someone in need. That means something. Caleb swallowed hard. He wasn't used to being seen. I don't want to just hand you money, Margaret continued. But I do have an offer. That afternoon, as Caleb packed up to leave, Margaret handed him an envelope. What's this? He asked. An opportunity, she said. I need someone I can trust to help run the farm. Someone who's good with their hands, who doesn't back down from hard work. Someone who needs a fresh start. Caleb stared at her. Margaret, I can't. You can, she interrupted. I know what it's like to struggle, Caleb. I know what it's like to be alone, to think the world is against you. But I also know what it's like to be given a chance. Caleb opened the envelope. Inside was a work contract, full-time, with a real salary. Enough to build a stable future for him and Lily. He looked up, his throat tight. Why are you doing this? Margaret smiled. Because sometimes, the right people come into your life at the right time. And if you can help a stranger in need, then you deserve a little kindness in return. Lily tugged on his sleeve. Daddy, can we stay? Caleb looked at her, then at Margaret, then at the vast, open land stretching out before him. A new life. A real chance. He took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I think we can. Margaret's smile widened. Welcome home.